From the European Parliament here in Brussels, this is Raw Politics. Thank you for joining us tonight, and we have a lot for you on the menu, including Orban offensive. Hungary fights back against an EU slapdown. Plus, get a job. Macron's comments to an unemployed gardener getting a lot of attention there. And the top job, why Commission Vice President Maros S wants to be president. Plus, WTF Europe, a comedian. He talks to us about European unity and stereotypes. And in tonight's Raw Moment, it's Italy versus Luxembourg in a political dust-up. Good to have you with us. Now it's time to meet our panel. Of course, we have Darren McCaffrey, our political editor at Euronews. Darren, what story are you liking tonight?
Well, it does have to the Viktor Orban, I think, on the offensive, and he really is taking the European Union to task on this supposed Article 7. The question, though, is how much is this really playing to his domestic gallery? Article 7's unlikely to be enacted, and you do have to question what politics is at play here.
Absolutely. And we also have joining us tonight Valentina Popp. She's a Brussels correspondent with the Wall Street Journal. Valentina, which story are you looking at?
I love the dust-up between Luxembourg and Italy because it's so rare that you see the so-called political establishment fighting back and actually using quite unsavory language.
Indeed, behind the scenes. And also joining us, Michael Mondrikamen, director of the movement Steve Bannon's Populist Foundation, set to open in Brussels. What about you, Michael?
Look, of course, the Orban issue is very important for us. But I like the Macron story because it reminds me Marie Antoinette, which was the queen that has been beheaded, the wife of Louis XVI, who said just before that if the French do not have bread, let's give them cake. Yeah. And Mr. Macron's attitude reminds me that a little. It was before the fall.
Yeah, off with their heads, right? All right, we will talk about all those tonight. But first, let's go to our top story. Hungary is hitting back following Brussels' slapdown last week. It's ready for battle, launching a legal challenge against the European Parliament. And this is after MEPs voted last week to trigger what is called Article 7. That's a disciplinary process against Hungary for allegedly undermining core EU core values. Now, here's Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban earlier today.
We can only call this report as an absurd collection of lies. Even a law student could state that the method of the approval of this report violates the Treaty of the European Union. They want to proceed against a member state because of the suspected defiance of the rule of law situation in a way that disregards the basic rule of law regulations. The Hungarian government plans to make legal steps. I will charge Minister Gulyás with the case.
So I think Viktor Orban was having a problem with the fact that the abstentions were not counted in the total. So this is what he's challenging. Do you think he's any chance of succeeding, Darren?
No, and those rules were set out before the vote last week. Now, obviously, this is unprecedented because there's not actually been a vote in the European Parliament on starting or triggering the Article 7 process before. But the rules were set out, as I say, but before the vote. I think what you are seeing here is a bruised ego to a degree. Over 2/3 of MEPs voting in this is pretty damning for Hungary. But also, as some MEPs pointed out last week who are sympathetic to Viktor Orban, this plays domestically quite well for him. And I suspect he will keep ramming home this message that actually it is him versus the European Union because it'll go down with the people that most support him.
Yeah, Valentina, what do you think? Is it a bruised ego or is it really a strategy for him to keep picking fights with Brussels to shore up his support?
It's definitely a strategy, and I must say it didn't serve, it didn't make the European Parliament, didn't do itself any favors by creating a bit of confusion ahead of the vote. So the lead lawmaker in charge of this procedure actually was briefing journalists the week before, and she was saying the opposite. She was saying the thing that Orban is saying, that if you go there and cast your vote as an abstention, that is counted in the overall turnout. So in the end, there was a lot of confusion on the day, like what happened actually and what rule does apply. And this serves Mr. Orban, of course, perfectly. I mean, it's like a slam dunk for him to profit of this confusion.
Buys into the stitch-up.
Exactly. But Michael, your movement is you're associating yourself with Viktor Orban. And this is associating yourself with a man who was seen here as violating the core values of the EU. I mean,
first of all, I don't see that there are real violations. It's basically, first of all, let me think that it's kind of nail or additional nail in the coffin of the EU as it functions today, for several reasons. First of all, it is seen by many as an attack against democracy. Orban was elected.
Many, I mean, that is, you have to quantify that.
Look, and they are after him because he didn't accept the migrants, because he didn't accept Soros' interference in the Hungarian politics, and for many other reasons, because he is a Christian, because he's pro-life, because he's fighting for a certain number of values, and he's fighting for his people. But I want to tell you that on top of that, because of this vote, they are making of Mr. Orban a kind of iconic figures, you know, within a lot of European circles, populist circles for sure. We had Mr. Salvini because he closed the harbors, and now we have Mr. Orban because he's defending the right of its people. I want to look, what is happening now? As long as the EU was meddling with, with economic problem or question, this was second zone, issue.
But just to put it out there, there were laws.
I think we also have to say, so the European Union is made up of lots of liberal democracies. Yeah. I mean, I think Viktor Orban already himself has described Hungary as a liberal democracy. Yes, exactly. And so in those circumstances, this is where there is this, this chasm that's now opening up. In that, there are elements of Viktor Orban's administration that are illiberal. You cannot deny that.
Guys, and that is saying it himself.
For now.
So that's clearly at odds with some of the founding principles of the European Union.
But I think there's one important voice that we need to bring in here, which is the Hungarian people. So let's go to Hungary, where we have Robert Szekányi, who is on the ground for us, because we know there has been a protest of some 1,000 people in Hungary against against the vote against Hungary. They say that it is against the Hungarian people. Robert, can you bring us up to speed with what is the opinion down there?
Well, good evening. There is no real new reactions after Mr. Orban actually said that they're going to take some legal actions against the EP vote. But because of the fact that the EP vote happened and Article 7 has been triggered, there were these protests. There was this protest on Sunday. And that is a reaction of people, because the whole summer nothing happened in Budapest. Everyone was on vacation. After the elections earlier this year, people just sunk into apathy, and nothing happened in there. But now there was this protest, like 4,000 people were there, and they also announced a new protest starting tomorrow. One of the opposition forces leader, former PM Ferenc Gyurcsány, announced a continuous protest starting tomorrow at 5 p.m. And he said that they wouldn't leave the streets as long as Mr. Orban would step down. And also on our national holiday, 23rd of October, there is another protest to be announced, organized by civilians.
I want to know that these people who are going out to the streets, around, you say 4,000 of them, are they representative of the Hungarian opinion in general?
As I told you before, whole summer nothing happened. Since the elections, nothing happened in Hungary. So only the fact that there was a protest, that just tells you something, that something is happening. There were 4,000 people there, mostly elderly, I have to say. But Euronews Budapest has made a poll right after the EP vote, and in that poll we asked 800 people between the age of 18 and 49, and 56% of them said that they are actually agree with the fact that the Sargentini report passed in the European Parliament. So yesterday's protest, it was organized by two opposition parties which gained actually almost like a 20% at the last elections. So I think, yes, you could say this is something happening in Budapest.
Very quickly, Robert, we don't have much time, but is Viktor Orban still popular? Would that be an accurate statement to say?
Viktor Orban is still popular. Just look at our last election results. They gained 49%, which gave them the supermajority in the parliament. And ever since, Viktor Orban's popularity has not gone any lower since He's still very popular. He got a lot of Facebook comments on his site after the EP vote that people would support him. Of course, there are a lot of people not agreeing with his policies, but still, this procedure is only helping him.
All right, thank you for that, Robert Sekani in Budapest for us. Now, I'd like to put this again to you, Darren. MEPs that voted against Article 7, be it because they want to keep trade ties or they don't want to meddle, but there's also the point that he's popular, he was elected. Is that valid?
Yeah, I think there's two elements to this. Well, there's three, actually. Yeah, there is clearly support within the European Union and the European Parliament for Viktor Orban's nationalistic line. We have seen a wave of populism across Europe, and that is clearly reflected in that support. So there is that element. There is a second element that lots of MEPs, and these were primarily found in the EPP, who didn't think that triggering Article 7 was the right way to deal with this issue or to deal with Viktor Orban, that you should be more inclusive. And then there was a third section of MEPs, primarily from Britain, and they got criticised at the weekend by some within the Conservative Party, this sense that they didn't want to do any harm to Hungarian-UK relations, because with Brexit, the UK will probably need as many friends as it can possibly get.
Absolutely. And Valentina, do you think that this would mean Viktor Orban and the Fidesz party of Viktor Orban would be out of the EPP at some point?
That is a very slight probability, I would say.
Slight. So you don't think it's going to happen?
No, because the EPP has for so many years protected Mr. Orban, and even now there were so many fights within the party to actually go and vote against him. I don't think with the EU elections coming up they can afford to lose, even few as they may be in numbers, the MEPs who come from Hungary, but they do represent a party within the EPP, so they can't afford to just kick them out.
It was interesting, though, that Manfred Weber did come out and, did hush his MPs.
Right.
I mean, there was speculation beforehand that that might not happen. It did in the end.
Before I get to you, Michael, because I want to read something from Steve Bannon, his quote saying, "I absolutely do not condemn Orban or what Salvini is doing. These individuals, these populist national movements across Europe are trying to get the sovereignties of their countries back." That is Steve Bannon talking there. He's founder of the movement. Also, we have Marine Le Pen. She said, "In France, our objective is to beat Macron. In Europe, it is to build with our allies, the other nationalist groups, a majority that makes a break from the decaying European Union." Marine Le Pen, the National Rally leader. So, okay, Michael, I'll ask you.
So, many things to say about this.
But well, first of all, is Steve Bannon working with Viktor Orban?
We'll meet him soon, I think, and we'll see. For the rest, several comments. First, for the first time, you are touching to the identity of the people, because the EU would like to impose on the Hungarian, on the people with whom they have to live. That's why they are all up in arms in many countries, because the Hungarians and many people say within Europe, we have to decide for ourselves who shall be our neighbors next door. I would like to add about the vote several things. First, it's 2/3, 1/3. It'll be very interesting to see after the next election how such a vote would develop after what I believe will be the populist uprising. But I would like to add something about the vote. We have made a check. It happens that within Mr. Soros' circles, there is a confidential document called Reliable Allies of Open Society in the European Parliament. It happens that the rapporteur, Mr. Sargentini, is a reliable partner of Mr. Orban, and we check almost all the MEPs present that are seen as reliable partners have voted in favor of the condemnation of Hungary. This means that you have a lot of lobbying going on.
Let's give Valentina a chance
within
to
the
reply.
European Parliament.
You are Belgian. You are a Belgian politician. In Belgium, there is such a thing as freedom of university and freedom of media. Would you condone that in Belgium such policies from the government are being put in place, that freedom of expression and of the media and of universities are curtailed to cater to a specific party in government?
I would never accept that a billionaire from the US would finance a university with the aim in order to build up a movement, in order to bring down the elected government.
Are you actively looking at the funding that Free University in Brussels is getting, or Catholic University in Louvain is getting?
The aim is not to undermine our government. The aim is not to undermine the current government. This is the problem of Mr. Sozenata. He wants to play a role with his money, you know, with the university and NGO in order to change the policy of the elected government.
Bad guy as well. It's pretty clear that Viktor Orban's what he thinks of Hungary and the future of Europe as an illiberal democracy is clearly at odds with what Europe has been traditionally made up of.
It's not at odds with the will of the people.
Okay, guys, I will have to cut it here for a while.
We'll have to define what is illiberal democracy.
We will definitely be talking a lot more of this in our future shows. But for now, let's move on to another story that is making a lot of noise right now. The French President Emmanuel Macron, because he is in hot water, he offered some career advice to an unemployed man over the weekend. Alex Morgan and the Cube team have been digging into this story. Alex, what do you have for us?
It's a lively debate going on down there in Brussels today. Just listening in to you guys. Well, needless to say, that's not the only lively discussion going on. There's a lot of conversation about this video from President Emmanuel Macron, as Tesa was saying there, who spoke to a young man who was looking for a job over the weekend. The full video is on Euronews' Twitter feed. Let me just bring you a couple of clips from it. So this man here is talking to the president at an open session at the Elysee Palace, saying, no matter how hard I try, I'm a gardener, there are no jobs. I've sent my CV, I've tried and tried, but I can't find a job. Now, the French president says in response, you need to broaden your field. Look at hotels, look at restaurants, look at construction. And he advises him to cross the street, literally cross the street from the Elysee Palace, saying if you move neighborhoods, you'll find plenty of jobs. If I cross the street, I'd find one for you, the president says. Now, it's that wording, this interaction, is worth saying they end it by shaking hands. It's perfectly amicable, but for his opponents, this is another example of Macron being out of touch. Let's just bring you up some of what they're saying. Eric Coquerel, who's a politician, saying, it goes to show Emmanuel Macron, president of the rich. Now, that's an image Macron's had a difficulty shaking. Let's not forget, he's a former investment banker. Well, people seeing this exchange of, just cross the street and find a job, is almost being a bit flippant, not understanding the concerns of ordinary people. Now, the president's spokesman said, well, the president was just giving him a bit of tough love, if you like, telling him there are jobs in these other fields. And it is true. According to officials, around 100,000 jobs are open and vacant in the hospitality sector. But still, you can see how this is becoming a politicised argument there in France. But other people, positive swing to this. Jérôme Jarre, who is a very powerful social media influencer, well, he says, on a positive side of this, I want to find this guy because I found a job. I found a gardening job. And he's tweeting and sharing things on his social media accounts, calling for people to sort of come forward and help introduce him to this man. So there is a positive swing on this. Social media, if you like, mobilising to try and find a job for this young, unnamed man. We don't know who he is. He hasn't come forward to identify himself yet. But as well as that, there are, needless to say, some people mocking the French president and, in fact, this whole encounter, including this hashtag here, which says Macron crosses the street. And this sign here, it says French people, to find a job, push this button and cross the street. So you can see some people finding the French president's wording quite humorous. But jokes aside, the reality is in France, the unemployment rate, it is higher than the European average, about 9%. Now, that's higher than a lot of other countries. UK, for example, around 5, just under 5%. So France really does have a problem here. And Tesa and panel, you can see how this really is a heated discussion. This latest element, if you like, picking up on a wider, longer discussion that's got a lot of people talking.
All right, thank you for that, Alex and the Cube team. Valentina, do you think Macron is tone deaf? He's just not...
It does remind me of another encounter of his with a young man who was telling him, Manu this, Manu that, and then he
put him in his place.
And he said, you know, I am Mr. President and you should address me correctly. And, you know, you have arguments on both sides. You can say maybe he does have a point. Maybe if you put yourself together, you might find a job, but it doesn't
There's more about Emmanuel Macron. Let's stay with him because he happens to be the subject of tonight's Power Play. His popularity is in free fall. Marine Le Pen hot on his heels, and for the French president, there was only one way to save face. A new line of Macron merchandise made its debut over the weekend. A selection of postcards, mugs and T-shirts, you name it. Some for as much as €25, all celebrating the French leader. The reception, in a word, mixed. Some people on Twitter responded by creating their own T-shirts, replacing the president's face with memes of his recent scandals. Very quick reaction, Darren.
I think you'd have to be a bit of a mug to spend €25 on a mug of Emmanuel Macron, to be perfectly frank. I think you're right. It's clear that his attempted leadership style is jarring with many people, though clearly this argument about being more proactive to get work is one that's been had lots of times across Europe.
All right, sorry, we don't have much time now, but we have more...
Might I say that his words about the gardener is just kind of sheer contempt, you know, for the ordinary guy, for this gardener, for the deplorable. This is the attitude.
We'll have to leave it at that, because coming up, we have a lot more. Commission Vice President Maros S wants to be the next Commission President. He'll be sitting right here after the break. Plus, Paul Taylor, the man who made a career out of mocking the French on European unity and stereotypes.
About simplistic solutions built on populist, anti-European or xenophobic views. They exploit people's fears, legitimate disappointments or anger. They steal, twist and misuse the sense of patriotism. They thrive on divisions. And they often play with fire, eager to destroy our European cooperation, our European dream.
Welcome back to Raw Politics. That was Commission Vice President Maros S this morning officially announcing his bid for a promotion to be the Socialists and Democrats' lead candidate for the position of EU Commissioner. And also joining us today, of course, Darren, you're back on the show, and Valentina Pop, Brussels correspondent for The Wall Street Journal. You were talking there about simplistic language, using fears, exploiting fears. Were you thinking of certain individuals or groups in particular? What were you trying, your message really?
I think my message was that I am one of many who actually lived behind the Iron Curtain. We've been outside of the European Union, and we really lived in the societies where you had no democracy. So I know how harsh it was, how difficult it was, and therefore, when we are now in this age, and I hear, you know, some of the stories, some of the simplistic solutions, and also the attempt to scare the people and to try to convince them.
Okay, so what is the solution you'll be bringing?
I think the solution is that we need to have a little bit more of a positive agenda. We have to really ignite the aspiration in the European people to make sure that Europe will continue to be the best place on earth to live in, and therefore
the people feel that their fears are not being addressed. How would you address that?
Of course, I think we have to reconnect with the people and talk to them directly. And I know from really, I would say, hundreds of meetings I had across Europe over the last few years, that what is the best argument you can provide with the people is a concrete example of where Europe has to work together, where Europe delivered, and where without Europe we simply wouldn't play the important role on the global stage. Be it, you know, this industrial policy, the autonomy in key technologies, or simply ability to play more freely on the global stage, to remain the global actor. And I think for all that, with such partners and competitors like United States and China, there is not a single country in Europe which can do it on its own.
Darren, you met... OK, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's interesting you've talked today that you don't want Europe to be defined as in north, east, south and west. Yeah. And yet, somewhat ironically, you see very much the fact that you are from Eastern Europe as a pulling point. Why is that? Why do you think that's so important? That actually the next Commission President is not someone from Western Europe?
I think that why is it so important is that you hear a lot about East-West divide. You hear a lot about different perception. Certain problems have in the North and in the South. And I think that we have to put end to it. And therefore, in my speech and in my many interventions before that, I made it very clear that I think that we just need to try to understand each other better. We need to talk to each other more because the perceptions are very different. And I saw how different perceptions you had on some economic issues we've been dealing with and how differently they've been perceived on the both sides of Europe. And therefore, I think we need to unite them and make sure that we understand each other better.
But there is a difference in the sense that, as you rightly pointed out, many Eastern European countries do not have these deep-seated roots of democracy. And actually, they have got very different attitudes from people
and definitions of what democracy is.
And what we're seeing is that chasm open up. You have to do something tangible to bridge that divide. It can't just be, we need to be optimistic.
No, of course. But at the same time, I also think that we should really bring positive agenda to the next European Parliament elections. I think that it would be falling into the trap of these Eurosceptics and anti-Europeans if we would have the single-issue elections. That it would be all about migration or about the single issues, because I think that we have much more to accomplish and we have a lot to do in the areas I mentioned just a second ago. We really have to make sure that Europe will remain a global actor.
I think people would like something concrete. We're saying positive agenda, and it sounds good as a countermeasure to fear-mongering, but what concretely would people galvanize for?
I think if you look for concrete agenda, so I mean, I know that we do not have much more time, but there are issues like the need for geostrategic technological sovereignty. I saw what we can do in Europe if we work together. Look at the project we just started, the Airbus for batteries. Look what we can do for conversion on the carbon-intensive region and how indispensable Europe is to fight climate change. So for all these areas, we need real European unity and this.
But you also need an alternative agenda on the issues that really do matter to people.
Speaking of alternative agenda, I mean, there are individuals now that you've announced your candidacy, and so did the main parties. But here we're slowly hearing names of politicians, and someone has been put forward, in fact, by a former presidential candidate in France, and he said that one guy that would be really good is the bad boy of Greek politics, Yanis Varoufakis. He said he would be an excellent candidate for president of the European Commission. He has faced up to the Troika, the Council, the ECB. He would make an excellent successor to Juncker. I mean, to your point, you need someone very different. What do you think of this comment? Can he be?
He's definitely
entertaining.
As we saw a few weeks ago when you interviewed him, he's got very passionate views about Europe. He is concerned about the rise of populism and wants a whole alternative agenda. And I think very well and good talking about an optimistic message and about the alternatives that Europe can offer for voters. But there also has to be, whoever is the next Commission President, and interestingly, Jean-Claude Juncker, when I interviewed him last week, said his biggest regret was this growing split between the East and the West, is someone has to be able to counter with actual tangible things the concerns of voters when it comes to issues like migration, rather than just saying we need to talk about something else.
And Valentina, you have been a Brussels correspondent for a while now. You've seen several elections. Are you optimistic about this election being slightly, more different and would address actual problems rather than kicking the can down the road?
Oh, it's for sure is going to be different. I'm not sure how optimistic I am about the outcome. I think it will result in a pretty hung parliament, or where a splintering for sure of the center. That's what every pollster is predicting. But in terms of how people can galvanize around Europe for a theme or a topic, I'm actually quite pessimistic. I must say I must agree with Mr. Orban that elections are held domestically, and the domestic issues are that topping the agenda and not European issues.
I'll give you the last word on this. Everyone's looking at the rise of a more populist bloc in the parliament. I mean, the center, it doesn't exist anymore, does it?
No, I think it exists, but of course we have to make it much more vibrant, much more present in our member states, and to have the positive agenda, because I agree with you that migration is a big problem, but I think we are dealing with it, and I'm sure that by the European elections we will have good solutions which will bring that sense of security to our people. But if you're talking about East and West, I think what is also very important to talk is that people are worried about the globalizations, about the income, about the future of their job, and still the differences between East and West are quite big. So therefore, I'm for restarting the integration engine, where we would really look for the ways how we can really accelerate the smoothing over the differences and problems which we have in this relationship. And I think it's absolutely crucial, and I believe that Centre will play its part.
Thank you very much, Maros S. for being here today.
He'll have to come on when he wins.
You have to come on. And thank you, Valentina Pop, for the Wall Street Journal. Darren, you'll stay with us. All right. Now, a Belgian court today rejected a Spanish extradition request for rapper Valtonish. He has been sentenced to 3.5 years back home for allegedly praising terrorism in his songs. Alex Morgan and theCUBE has more on this story. Alex.
Tessa, we do. This is Joseph Miguel Arenas. He's 24 years old. He is a Spanish rapper. The Spanish state wanted him extradited from Belgium. Now, this whole incident's been described by some on social media as another slap in the face from Belgium to Spain. Now, let's explain why for you. So, as you were saying there, he was facing 3.5 years in Spanish prison after the highest court in the land upheld charges against him, saying he insulted and incited violence against the royal family and supported terrorist groups. Well, needless to say, José Miguel Arenas rejected those claims. He said, no, my lyrics are controversial, but they must be protected by freedom of speech. The Spanish courts threw that out. So he fled the country. He fled the country and he arrived in Belgium. Now, a Belgian judge has refused Spain's European arrest warrant to get him back, saying, well, we can't find an offence in our law anyway, and also saying that the threat against the family, royal family, is not credible. So you can see here, this is Belgium saying no to Spain, and it's certainly got some reaction. Well, we spoke to Joseph Miguel Arenas ourselves. He spoke to our Euronews journalist, Anna, and this is what he had to say. First of all, he said, justice has been done, and he's happy that it's real justice, not politicised justice. But he's not stopping here. In the past, he's called Spain a fascist state. So this is the kind of tone we've got here. I'm not going to stop here. I'm going to the Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg because I'm going to set a precedent. Now, his lawyer also spoke to us saying Spain is misusing the European arrest warrant. It cannot be used to go after people who, in his view, have an opinion. And there's certainly some opinions online. Let's just bring you up this one from Gloria Elizo here. She is Spanish and she writes that once again, Spain looks ridiculous on the world stage, and saying Spain will continue to look ridiculous as long as they see freedom of expression as a crime. Now, again, other people pointing out this is not the first time Belgium has rejected Spain's European arrest warrant. They went after Carles Puigdemont, the Catalan independence leader. Belgium said, we're not extraditing him. So again, people calling this another slap in the face. That's certainly what Gary Lewis saying here. Belgian court rejecting this, again saying, you know, let me just bring up that one comment. Here we go. Here it is from Guy Hedgecoe saying, yes, another Belgian slap in the face for Spain's judiciary. This idea here that Belgium, again, rejecting Spain's use of this arrest warrant. And Tim Parfitt saying, look, he's a journalist. He's saying it's time for Spain to get real, comparing these lyrics to those of the Sex Pistols, saying, look, imagine what the Sex Pistols were doing all that time ago, saying, Spain, get real. So what do you think? You can let us know and join in our discussion anytime using #TheCube.
All right, thank you for that, Alex. Always an interesting debate, freedom of speech or incitement to hatred. Anyway, after the break, we have a lot more for you. You may recognize this guy from YouTube videos poking fun at some cultural stereotypes, the French cultural stereotypes. Up next, we ask Paul Taylor to talk European identity. Don't go away. Welcome back to Raw Politics. Now, you may know Paul Taylor from his WTF France series, and if you don't know him yet, you will definitely know the subject of his humor. He gently and sometimes not so gently mocks all things French, from food to language to bureaucracy. We're going to catch up with him in a minute, but first let's look at his recent work. An easy target, French strikes.
Seems to me like Les Grèves is like the Second Amendment in the US. You know, no other country understands it. It's a pain in the ass and people get really angry and they take it away. I get it, Jean-Pierre. You go on strike because you want more money and more holidays, but the French company you work for disagrees. It's like a divorce negotiation. Divorce pour tous! And like every divorce negotiation, it doesn't just get solved by you buggering off down the street with your mates. It's just really annoying. Why is it annoying, Paul? I'm glad you asked. It's really annoying for one reason. Number one, because you going on strike for your own selfish reasons has a domino effect for the rest of us. For example, today it's my grandmother's birthday, but because she lives in England, the wine that she drinks tastes like the devil's piss, so I'm going to send her this quality box of wine. But I need to go to the post office. But they're on strike. Or are they on lunch? It's really difficult to tell. Oh no, they're definitely on strike because of email. Email's taking all their jobs.
Well, Paul Taylor is currently working on a new TV show about cultural stereotypes and is touring with his stand-up show Franglais. And he was in Belgium this weekend, and our correspondent Maeve McMahon went to catch up with him.
Paul Taylor.
Hi.
Nice to see you.
Yeah, great to be here.
Look at this wonderful hairdo.
Yeah, it wasn't by choice. It was we were in Sweden filming my new documentary series that is coming out about European stereotypes, and so we thought it would be funny that I would look like a Swedish person while being in Sweden. So yeah,
obviously not your natural colour.
Yeah.
But your focus is always on stereotypes. Do you not think that divides us a little bit more in Europe?
I think it can do. I think that like specifically now with like the kind of uprising of kind of, you know, far right parties, they use stereotypes negatively to kind of try and split us apart. But I'm more of the opinion that if we can laugh about each other's stereotypes all together, then it kind of brings us closer. And that's kind of the idea that I had behind the documentary series, yeah.
So you mean your videos are intentionally offensive, but do people have the right not to be protected from being offended? Is that not a bit politically incorrect?
I have the opinion that I have on this is the opinion that one of my favourite comedians, Ricky Gervais, has, is that people can get offended. They're allowed to be offended. It doesn't mean that they're right, though. And I think, you know, nowadays, with social media and everything kind of exploding, people get offended very quickly about stuff that maybe a couple of years ago they didn't, with this thing where somebody can send out a tweet and it can just get retweeted and it can get out of context. And I think that's the hardest thing is as a comedian is saying things on stage in the context of a 1 hour show. If they're taken out of context, sometimes they're misunderstood.
Right, let's move on to Belgium. So Paul, now we are in mini Brussels.
Yes.
This is of course the Complas. So I want to ask you, what is it to be European? Is there a European identity?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. Just in general, the idea of being a citizen of a country, like what does that mean? I personally feel a bit European because I grew up in France and Spain, in Switzerland, in the UK. So I think it's just all about cultural, not cultural differences, but things that you have culturally growing up kind of form who you are as a person.
And Jean-Claude Juncker, he said Europe was the love of his life. What do you make of that?
I like it, yeah.
Not too cheesy?
I mean, yeah. I mean, probably from someone like him, yeah. It could sound cheesy, but if it was in a song, you'd be like, "Oh, this is amazing. This is poetic."
But what do you think Europe needs right now?
What do I think Europe needs? It's a great question. I think we just need to have more fun in general and just not take things so seriously. Like as soon as somebody says something that kind of explodes, or I don't know, I feel like we need to just take a step back from I don't know, from being serious a little bit and just enjoy what we have together.
Okay, well let's continue to do so and take you to another part of mini Europe.
Yes, let's do it.
So now, Paul, we're here at mini UK.
Yes.
We've seen some little anti-Brexit protesters.
Yeah, that's good. I like that.
So we know how the curator of this museum feels about Brexit. Take a look at this map. I picked it up at a petrol station outside Strasbourg.
Okay.
So according to the French, Brexit means Brexit. And the UK is already officially off the map.
Oh, it's already done. Well, that's the thing in France. Like, everyone thinks we're already gone. Like, I spend my time telling people, no, it hasn't happened yet. We said we were going to get divorced, but the papers haven't come through yet. So we're not yet divorced.
Yeah, technically you're still a fully functioning member.
But clearly the French think that we do. Well, that's typically French, you know.
And if you come back here next April, do you reckon this will still be here? It should be demolished.
I think they should, well, if we leave, then we're not in, I don't know if this is like a mini European Union or it's a mini Europe. Because if it's a mini European Union, yeah, it should go. But, you know, we're still physically in Europe, of the continent. Well, as long as the phone charges, the roaming charges when you're using your phone from just there to there don't change, then it'll be all right.
Now, I know your focus is, of course, France, and that's where you're based. But
Yeah.
if you were to do a what's up for other European countries, how would you react, for example? What's up Latvia?
What's up Latvia? Alcohol.
What's up Sweden?
Blonde.
What's up Italy?
Not even a word, just that.
What's up Belgium?
Friet.
What's up Ireland?
Guinness.
What's up Estonia?
Oh, good question. I don't know. More alcohol.
So we've got two countries with alcohol.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of alcohol in the country.
There is indeed. Paul Taylor, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Well, I'm back with our panelists, Darren McCaffrey, political editor at Your News, Valentina Popp, reporter with the Wall Street Journal, and Mihail Mundrikamin, director of the movement. So let's talk about cultural stereotypes there. What do you make of it? Good basis for an actual discussion on serious issues? Valentina?
I like the mockery, I like the satire of it, but stereotypes, I'm afraid, currently are actually being misused to stoke fears and to channel the discourse on very narrow topics rather than looking more broadly at what a society should be worrying about. So.
What about the use of humour, for example? Like we talk about strikes, we talk about...
Yeah, I think the use of humour is really important, and it does clearly play on the differences that exist. The whole point is that these differences in the European context actually ultimately are probably quite small. In saying that, what it is a reinforcement of, and this might buy in slightly your point, is what the European Union has not succeeded in doing is creating any really strong sense of European identity. Exactly. And this project, decades and decades long, has not really created in anyone's mind that their national identity is somehow lesser to the European identity. And that is definitely true. In every European country, national identity trumps European identity.
Right, I will get you to comment on this next one, because we just have enough time left for today's Raw Moment, and it involves secret filming and a war of words. It was a meeting of interior ministers in Vienna on Friday, which set the whole thing off. Pens as well as insults were thrown at Luxembourg's foreign minister, Jean Asselborn, and he took on Italy's deputy prime minister, Matteo Salvini. The two clashed over their views on migration, and they have been locked in a war of words ever since. Take a look.
Rispondo pacatamente al suo punto di vista, che non è il mio. Se in Lussemburgo avete bisogno di nuova immigrazione, io in Italia preferisco aiutare gli italiani a tornare a fare. Io non l'ho interrotta, cortesemente, se lei mi lasciasse finire, io non l'ho.
Au Luxembourg, on avait des dizaines de milliers d'Italiens comme migrants qui ont travaillé à Luxembourg pour que vous, en Italie, vous avez de l'argent pour payer pour vos enfants. Merde alors.
Definitely a Raw Moment there, Mihail.
Yes, outrageous comparison for Mr. Asselborn, because such a big difference between the Italians. They were a contract, they were important because there was an agreement, sharing the same value, coming to work hard in the mines or in other industry. Nothing to do with the current migration from Africa, with totally different background, are not invited to come. They have no qualification for most of them to speak language and so on. So it was a bit outrageous comparison. But what is interesting also is the values of Mr. Salvini, which is clearly, well, we prefer invest money, in raising Italian children and not importing, migrants and having their children. That's very important. I share that view. This is one of the major problems from many countries in Europe, in Italy, in Germany too. Mm-hmm. And there is a big principle. If you don't do children anymore, other will do them on your behalf.
It might be slightly difficult for a Belgium to talk about African migration, given the fact of what Belgium did to African countries
what
over the last century.
What did we do? Look,
I mean, you know history only too well. You know your history only too well. To make that comparison, it is wrong.
We brought roads, schools. We brought roads, schools, hospitals, and also more unpleasant things.
Not just
also civilization.
I think what is interesting about this is, I don't think this does anyone any harm. It is politics, it's passionate, and it should be expressed that way. And for Asselborn, it seemed that it was filmed by Salvini's people, and it was clearly there to embarrass him. I think it didn't do Asselborn any harm either.
No, it actually did Asselborn a favour, I think, and it makes him more... pleasure, I don't know, more sympathetic.
It did a lot of good to Mr. Salvini too. Believe me, in many circles, this video became viral, and it shows he's fighting for his principle and for the Italian person. Believe me, the lecture.
I think we shouldn't be ending the show. This should just keep going on.
There are two camps here, clearly, and this is serving maybe both camps.
All right.
I will agree with that.
We'll have to leave it at that. Thank you to all our panelists and our guests tonight, and thank you for watching us here on Raw Politics. We'd, of course, like to hear your views. Tell us what you're talking about. I'm on Twitter, at Tesa Arcilla, or, of course, at Euronews, and use the hashtag Raw Politics. Have a good evening. Bye for now.